All right, buckle up because today we're going deep into a case. The story of Paula Kurland. You've probably heard the name, but this isn't your typical true crime story. We've dug up court docs, interviews, even some psych studies, all to kind of, get inside her head after the murder of her daughter, Mitzy.
Yeah, and the thing that really jumps out from all this material is that um, this case went way beyond just the courtroom.
Mm.
Paula, she didn't just want, you know, legal justice. She took it a step further, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's what makes this whole deep dive so interesting. We're not just talking about a crime,
Right.
but about like what comes after. How does someone deal with the unimaginable? But first, let's set the scene right. Back in 1986, Austin, Texas, Mitzy's celebrating her 21st birthday, a night that should have been, pure joy turned into a total nightmare.
Yeah, the sources really paint a chilling picture of that night. After celebrating with friends, Mitzi goes home with her roommate, Kelly Farquar. And that's when the intruder, 25-year-old Jonathan Wayne Nobles, breaks in.
And the details, like in the police report, are just brutal. Kelly's attacked first, her throat slashed, almost decapitated. Mitzi hears the commotion and tries to hide, in a closet. But Nobles finds her, stabs her 28 times.
And, that level of violence, especially, considering Nobles had no connection to them at all, really shook that whole community. What could drive someone to do something like that?
It's a question that, kind of hangs over this entire story. And it gets even more complex when you bring in Mitzi's boyfriend, Ron Ross. He was at the apartment that night and actually fought back against Nobles, got stabbed 19 times himself. Luckily, though, he survived.
And his survival was, like, super important for the case. His testimony, along with that blood trail Nobles left, led right to his capture and arrest, according to what we found.
Nobles confessed, no question. But here's where it gets really interesting. The guy showed absolutely no remorse. Like, reading those court transcripts, the coldness is chilling. Does the lack of remorse, fundamentally change the nature of a crime?
Well, that's a good question. The research, especially the stuff on criminal psychology, suggests that remorse can really influence sentencing, even how society views the whole crime. It's like we need that acknowledgement, that recognition of the wrong.
So without that remorse, does it make the horror worse? Does it make the demand for justice that much stronger?
I think it's possible. The sources definitely show that Noble's lack of remorse really got to that community. It fueled the outrage and probably contributed to him getting the death penalty.
Okay, so we've got this brutal crime, a killer with zero remorse, a community trying to process this awful event. But earlier you said Paula didn't just, rely on the courts for justice. What does she do?
Right, so for 12 years, Paula lives with this unimaginable pain. The trial, the sentencing, but none of it brings her peace. Then, as Noble's execution date gets closer, Paula makes an extraordinary decision. She wants to meet him face to face.
Wow, that's a huge step, but why? What was she hoping to get out of that? Was it revenge or something more?
From the sources, especially her interviews, it's clear revenge wasn't the motivator. She felt like the system, while necessary, just couldn't give her that closure she needed. She wanted to confront Nobles directly, make him see the life he took.
It's like she was trying to gain some power back in a situation where she was totally powerless.
Exactly. And that's why her decision to wear Mitzi's picture during the confrontation becomes so powerful, right? She wanted Nobles to see not just this grieving mother, but the vibrant young woman whose life he'd taken.
Almost like she was forcing him to acknowledge the real human cost of what he did. To see Mitzy, not just some nameless victim, but a daughter, a friend, someone with dreams.
Absolutely. And you got to remember, this kind of meeting, a victim's family meeting their loved one's killer, it's incredibly rare. There are ethical concerns, legal hurdles, but Paula was persistent.
So what was it about Paula's story that allowed this meeting to happen? Does this set some kind of precedent?
Well, each state has its own laws about victim-offender dialogue. Some are, more progressive than others. Texas, at that time, actually had a program for these meetings, though they were still pretty rare, especially in death penalty cases.
So we're seeing a shift in how the justice system considers victims' families, right? It's not just about punishment anymore. It's about acknowledging that trauma, the long-lasting impact.
Exactly. Paula's case, while unique, is a powerful example of that shift.
Okay, so we've set the scene. A horrific crime, a community in shock, and a mother determined to confront the man who took her daughter's life. This is where things get really thought-provoking. Stick with us, because next we're going to explore what happened when Paula finally came face-to-face with Jonathan Wayne Nobles. We left off with Paula getting that rare meeting with Nobles, the man who killed her daughter. What do we know about this meeting? Like, what went down between them?
Well, the actual details were kept private for years, but some things have come out through Paula's interviews and writings later on.
So she decided to, share what happened. That must have been a tough choice.
Oh, absolutely. She's talked about how she really struggled with that, whether to keep it private, this sacred thing between them. But in the end, she felt like she had to share it, hoping it might help others going through something similar.
That's incredibly brave of her. So what can you tell us about that meeting? What was it like in the room?
Super tense. Emotionally charged, for sure. Remember, Paula walks in wearing Mitzy's picture. It's like she wanted Nobles to really see the life he took.
And Nobles, how did he react to seeing her there?
From what Paula said, he seemed, I don't know, surprised at first, maybe even a little rattled. He confessed, gone through the trial, but this was different. Now he was facing the real consequences of his actions.
That must have been so powerful for Paula, to finally be able to speak directly to him, to tell him what she needed to say.
Yeah, exactly. She wasn't there to beg for an apology or forgiveness. She was there to take back her voice, to honor Mitzy, and maybe force Nobles to see the weight of what he'd done.
Our sources mention that she read letters to him, letters from friends and family about Mitzy, about the hole she left in their lives. Did Nobles react to those at all?
Apparently he did. Paula describes seeing a flicker of something in his eyes. Sadness, maybe even regret. It wasn't a full-blown confession, but it was something, a crack in that wall he put up.
So in a way, she got through to him in a way the courts couldn't. He acknowledged the human side of what he did.
Yeah, in a way. But we should say, not everyone thought meeting Nobles was the right thing to do. Some say it gave him a platform, a chance to manipulate things or even get some sick satisfaction.
That's a fair point. It's such a complicated issue. What do the sources say about the good and bad of these kinds of encounters?
Well, the research on these victim-offender dialogues is still developing. But there's more and more evidence that they can be good for both sides, especially when the offender is truly remorseful.
What kind of good are we talking about?
For victims, it can bring closure, make them feel empowered. They get to express everything directly to the person who hurt them. It can also help them understand the crime better, which is a big part of healing.
And for the offenders.
It's a chance to take responsibility, show remorse, start making things right. It can help them develop empathy, which is key to preventing them from doing it again.
But Nobles was already on death row, so what good could a meeting do for him at that point?
That's a good question. Even in those cases, where the punishment is severe, these dialogues can still have value. It's a chance for reflection, to come to terms with what they did, and to maybe seek forgiveness, even if it's just from themselves.
So it's not really about changing the legal outcome, but about finding some peace, some understanding on a human level.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the human cost of the crime for both the victim and the person who committed it.
But let's be real, not everyone finds that kind of understanding or closure, right? These dialogues are risky. They can bring up old trauma, make people feel worse.
Right. You're absolutely right. That's why it has to be done carefully, with proper preparation and support for both people involved. It's not something to just jump into.
And there's no guarantee it'll turn out well. It's not some magic solution, just a tool that can sometimes help people heal and understand.
Yeah, exactly. Whether it's the right thing depends on a lot of things, like the type of crime, whether both people are willing, and if there are trained people to help.
So Paula's choice to meet Nobles was deeply personal. And while we can talk about the pros and cons, in the end, it's up to the individual to decide what's right for them.
No doubt about it. There's no one right way to deal with such a heavy trauma.
But Paula's story does show us the limits of our justice system, right? Sometimes punishing the offender isn't enough. There's that deeper human need for understanding, for acknowledgement, for some kind of peace.
And that's where this idea of restorative justice comes in. It's about fixing the damage caused by the crime, not just punishing the person.
Okay, tell me more about that. What does restorative justice actually look like? So you're saying restorative justice, it's not just about, locking someone up. It's about trying to actually fix the damage done to everyone.
That's it. It recognizes that crime, it doesn't just affect the victim and the offender. It's their families, their communities, society as a whole. It's about making a space for dialogue, for understanding, finding ways to repair the harm that was done.
That sounds, I don't know, kind of idealistic. Does restorative justice actually work, like in the real world?
Well, the research, especially on these restorative justice programs, it shows that it can be surprisingly effective, particularly with, juvenile offenders or nonviolent crimes.
Mm.
Often you see higher victim satisfaction, offenders are less likely to reoffend, and there's a real sense of community healing.
So it's not about, letting the offender get away with it.
No, not at all. It's about holding them accountable, but in a way that goes beyond just punishment, right? It's about getting them to truly understand the impact of what they did, taking responsibility and actually making amends.
I can see how that might be better in some situations, like with younger offenders who might still change. But what about someone like Nobles? I mean, brutal murders, no remorse, he was already on death row. Could restorative justice even apply there?
It's a tough one. Restorative justice, it can be adapted to all sorts of situations, even the most challenging ones. The key is focusing on everyone's needs. The victims, the offenders, the community, everyone.
But in a case this horrific, how do you even start to repair that harm? Can you ever really make up for taking a life?
That's where it gets really complicated. And restorative justice, it's not going to erase the pain or bring someone back, but it can offer a way towards healing, towards reconciliation.
And for Paula, it seems like that path involved confronting Nobles head on, right? Making him see what he'd done.
Right. And their meeting, even though it wasn't like official restorative justice, it did have some similar elements. It gave them that space to talk, for Paula to say what she needed to say, and for Nobles to maybe start to acknowledge the impact of his actions.
It makes you think, how things might have gone differently if restorative justice had been there from the start. What if Nobles had had that chance to really get it, the consequences, to face the people he hurt, to be a part of fixing things?
It's impossible to know for sure, but yeah, it raises some big questions. Could it have changed his path? Or at least, lessen the harm he caused?
These are questions that stay with you after a story like this. It makes you wonder if we as a society are really doing enough to try these different approaches to justice. Are we too focused on punishment, without thinking about the possibility of healing and redemption?
That's a debate that's been going on for a long time. And Paula Kurland's story, it just adds another layer to it. Her choice to meet with Nobles, it pushes us to think outside those traditional lines of justice, to think about everyone involved, and to explore new ways of dealing with harm and helping people heal.
It reminds us that even in the darkest moments, there can be grace, courage, and even a chance for finding some kind of peace.
It's a story that sticks with you, makes you question what you believe, dig deeper into human nature, and think about the power of forgiveness, even when it seems impossible.
So here's something to think about, What does justice really mean to you? Is it just about punishment, or is there more to it? And when faced with such a huge loss, how would you define closure? Would you go the traditional route? Or would you forge your own path, like Paula did? These are tough questions, but they're worth thinking about.
Because in the end, it's these hard conversations, looking at things from different angles, challenging our own ideas. That's how we can start to build a world that's more just, more compassionate.
And on that note, that's where we'll leave this deep dive for today. Hopefully it's been, a thought-provoking look at a truly incredible story, a story that reminds us about the strength of the human spirit, the complexities of justice, and the possibility of finding healing, even when the loss is unimaginable.